Christian Parenting.
Let's talk about discipling our kids in the early years, from birth to the age of 3. What are the lessons we want them to learn? Let's talk about it today on Family Vision.
Hi, my name is Millie Rienow. Welcome to Family Vision with my parents, Dr. Rob and Amy Rienow, strengthening families through practical, encouraging, and real conversations.
Well, thank you for joining me again on part 2 of the early years. We are just kind of diving into some of these basic discipling and discipline concepts that we have to address as parents in the early years with our kids. And when I'm talking about the early years, for this podcast today, I really want you to be thinking about birth to the age of 3. I still consider the early years, 3 to 5 is another big stage, and then on to 5 to 7. But today, I really want to focus in on this birth to age 3. And I want to start off this conversation by reading again from our book, Visionary Parenting. And this is from the chapter on discipline. Children, from the moment they are born to about the age of 3, have unique discipleship needs that are critical to be addressed in this stage of their lives. Most of these needs can be addressed with 2 important words, love and security. The main method of addressing these 2 needs is experience. While our book cannot come close to adequately explaining the importance of attachment in parenting, it is helpful to understand that every child needs a healthy attachment to parents. The basis for this is love and security. Any family going through an adoption process receives a lot of teaching about the importance of attachment. They are also taught the risks to their adoptive children in regard to their personality and behavior formation if their kids do not form a healthy attachment to their adoptive parents. Often, adoptive parents have to implement what may seem like extreme measures, such as restricting visitors and exposure to people outside the home to help the adopted children to form loving attachment relationships with their new parents. And I wanted to start out that section introducing this idea of attachment, because attachment is this foundational discipleship hurdle that we want to happen in this time period of birth to age 3. And it's just extremely important. And what I find very interesting when I read in that book about adoptive parents, that this is one of these strange topics when it comes to attachment that I honestly feel like parents who have gone through an adoptive process have a better knowledge base and understanding of it than those of us who just have our natural born children. Because attachment is such a critical thing, and yet when you look at your average baby book and talking about milestones, you will hardly see that word come up. Yet if you are adopting a child, you're going to take a lot of classes on attachment and understand why it's so important that your children attach to you. Because like I said in our previous podcast, that love and security, these lessons that our kids want, that we need them to understand these things in these early years. And those really are our discipleship lessons that we're trying to teach them. They come in the form of developing secure attachments to our kids. Now, we are just having a conversation today, and if I go down this attachment trail, we're going to end up in a lot of crazy places. But I want to give you some names to think about. And first is Mary Ainsworth. She is like the foundational psychologist who talked about attachment. If you've had a Psych 101 class, you have probably studied Mary Ainsworth and probably studied her secure attachment, ambivalent attachment, avoidant attachment. Those are kind of the 3 big buckets, but you're probably familiar with that. But they are helpful. If you're interested in this, I would definitely recommend reading some of her work. But the other book I wanted to point out to you is a couple, or I should say some therapists, and that's the Yurkoviches. They have written a lot about this in their marriage books, talking how important it is understanding attachment and how it relates to our marriage relationships. But they give a really nice study from a layman perspective, I feel like, and understanding what attachment is and the different theories about it. But generally speaking, attachment is essential to have a good discipleship relationship with your kids. And you want your kids, we use the language in our visionary parenting book, as having this strong heart connection. Your kids, when they have a secure attachment to you, know that they can trust you. And they feel confident that you are going to love them, you're going to meet their needs, you're going to provide them with a sense of security. And when you have that in your head, that this is the central task of these early years, I do think that helps guide some of your everyday trials when it comes to managing the behavior of your children. And that's kind of transitioning into this next thing I want to talk about in these early years is this concept of their behavior versus the word discipline. Now, I remember being in a Bible study. I think my oldest, like her W, was 4 months old. And this other mom in the group had a 6-month-old. She was a little bit ahead of me. And she said, my baby's 6 months, so we're really working on discipline. And she was using that word to reference disciplining her behavior for putting their arms down when they ate or something. Like when she wanted to feed the baby, she wanted to have the arms down. Now, maybe it's a psychology background in me, we're very uncomfortable with the word discipline used in that context. And this is why. When I think of discipline, I really think in terms of a child understanding and making a conscious choice of knowing what is right or wrong. And by the end of this podcast, I'm going to explain that a little bit further as we would enter out of this age and into kind of the next stage of development with our kids, like once they're age 3 and older. But really, at these beginning years, for me, it just helpful for me to conceive what I'm doing more as behavior management. Because the reality is, even if you are training, for example, this mom I talked about, training a child to put their arms down before they take a bite of food, that's really just simply a behavior issue. It's almost like what we would refer to in our psych classes as a B.F. Skinner kind of thing. It's strictly behavioral. There's not really a moral decision here whether a child has their arms up or down when they're eating, when they're being fed. So when you think in terms of these early years, providing your kids love and security, but you also have to do a lot of things to manage their behavior because kids need to learn some basic rules in these ages, like how to respond to their parent's voice, how to respond to when your parent wants you to do something, responding to no, responding to the command danger. All of these things are kind of in this realm of a child learning what is the behavior that the parents are looking for from the child. But that to me is very different than this concept of discipline. And I will get into that a little bit later in today's conversation. But as a parent, I think it's so important to set up successful environments for our kids at these ages. So I'm going to go back to visionary parenting just to springboard again this conversation and read this section called Boundaries and Rules. Extravagant love also means secure boundaries. God shows his love for us through affection and boundaries. Our young children need to experience these as well. You probably have used a pack and play for your infant. We call it a happy camper, obviously hoping babies will be happy in the camper. Mom knows that the happy camper is a safe place for the baby. Whether the baby likes it or not, it is safe. As a baby grows into a toddler, we might move them from the happy camper to a larger gated area. We used to have a large room that we would spread an 8-foot gate across. The room was big enough for toddlers to explore and have fun, but it was also safe. As our children grow, we expand their safe zones. By the time our kids are passing from age 2 or 3, we are teaching them internal gates. They are learning their safe zones are rules and commands, not just physical gates. Through experience, they have been learning that they are cared for and that their world has rules and boundaries. We have taught them love and security. I like to read that section to kind of just springboard this conversation because this whole idea of us as parents setting up successful environments, successful boundaries for our kids is a great way to help think about this behavior management and discipling of kids in these ages. So let me take that example that I read and kind of expand on it and use what I call the stroller example. Now, Rob and I would kind of have some conflicts about these things when we were both at this, parenting at the same time, or in environments where, specifically I can remember at church, where all of a sudden we were coming at heads between wife and husband on the best way to handle a little one in a situation at church, for example. So when I have my baby in a stroller, that's a safe environment, right? They're buckled up. I can give them toys. I can manage their behavior pretty easily when they're in this stroller. But eventually, they're going to fuss and want to get out of the stroller. Now, my husband would usually, at the first fuss, would want to take him out and get him out of the stroller and be, oh, well, they don't want to be in the stroller, so I'll get them out of the stroller. Well, that would frustrate me very much because I, as the mom, knew that as soon as we took the step of taking the baby out of the stroller, we were entering a different zone. I was now going to be entering a zone where that child's going to want to crawl or walk. I mean, they're not going to be happy out of the stroller. They're going to explore. And that was an environment that I wasn't wanting to put the child in. My environment was going to be the stroller, and we were going to work to keep the baby in the stroller and entertained in the stroller because that was the environment I was setting up for that situation. And that just, when you think of parenting in the way that you want to be continually giving your kids different environments that they can be successful in and managing those environments, and gradually those environments will turn into commands where you can say to a child, you need to sit here for a few minutes. You need to sit here for 10 minutes. Like you can say that to a 2-year-old that you can't say to an 11th-month-old. And you begin to gradually take external gates and turn them into internal gates. But really, all these things are still in the realm of behavior management. These are not necessarily moral decisions that these kids are making. And I think that's a very important distinction. I was just having a conversation with a young mom the other day whose child's only about 12 months old. And, when she wants something, she'll have a little tantrum because she wants it. For example, she wants her mom's phone. And her parents or someone in her life was saying to her, oh, you really need to discipline those tantrums. Now, I don't really like that language because, again, it's kind of saying like this child is making this moral choice, when in reality, the child just really wants something, and it's not something that you want to give the child yet. So you're managing that behavior, and you're trying to give, you can solve that in many different ways. So, for example, if it's the child who wants your phone, and maybe you don't want to give them the phone, now, truth be told, Rush had my phone. My youngest child probably had my phone more than any other of my children. And I just made sure my phone was very secure with a lot of safety things, like he could be pretty rough on it and the phone was going to be fine. But yes, a lot of people would disagree with that parenting strategy. But needless to say, I would be more inclined to do that as I was an older and more experienced parent. But in my early years, I would maybe think in terms of, okay, what other kind of toy or what kind of item can I give this child in order to feed the curiosity of wanting this phone if I didn't want to give them my phone, as opposed to viewing it as, oh, this child is demanding or have a tantrum. This child is very curious and wants to play with what I have. That's what kids want to do. They want what they see their parents using. So when you have that kind of switch in your mind that these are learning how to manage behavior and trying to determine what are the ways, what you're going to allow and what you're not going to allow. So back with that stroller example, Rob and I would have some of those conflicts but I ended up, trying to just really work with Rob to say, when we're in church, I need the baby to stay in the stroller because that's the best way that I can manage him there. And then if he gets fussy and upset, then I will leave the church service or leave the area with all the people and take care of that behavior somewhere else, or give the child the room to roam and things like that. Because you're always trying to figure out what's the best interest of the child and what's the best interest of the family and how you're going to manage that behavior in all the different settings that you are in. And sometimes you're just going to have to deal with that child who's screaming in the grocery cart and you have all the people looking at you like, what have you done wrong? And the reality is the child just wants to get out of the grocery cart. And that's understandable. And you're going to get through the line, and you're going to eventually get the child out of the grocery cart, and everything's going to be okay. So there's some part as mom and parents, we just have to accept the fact that our kids are going to have their tantrums. We're going to have to deal with all that embarrassment and people's opinions of us, and that's perfectly okay. We need to be able to know how to manage that in a way that we're not insecure about how we are parenting or managing our kids' behavior. But what I see often as a mistake during this time period that I want to draw your attention to is that so often we characterize and assign motives to our kids at these young ages that are really, I think, do our kids a disservice. And I'm going to read a little bit more in our chapter to kind of explain that. So I said at the beginning of this chapter, we stated that discipline is not just about managing bad behavior. However, at this stage, there is a lot of management of bad behavior. Kids from birth to 3 are just trying to figure out what the rules and the boundaries are. This is not the time for long lectures and asking children, why did you do that? Childhood tantrums need to be managed. But we caution you not to assign motive and character traits to your young children's behavior. A frequent discipline mistake we often see parents making is describing their little one's behavior in terms of character traits. For example, a child is repeatedly told no when lunging towards an outlet. After several repeats, he may get a slap on the hand to teach him to stay away from danger. But what if he keeps trying to touch the outlet? He may be described as stubborn or defiant. But really, all that we know is that he was not deterred by no or a slap on the hand. A word such as defiant is more appropriate to use in the next stage of discipleship when children can begin to understand the difference between right and wrong. Defiance is when a child willfully chooses to do wrong when she clearly knows what is right. Young children do not have the ability to see the world this way. The process of discipleship is gradually teaching them this ability from God's Word. So therefore, traits such as jealous or stubborn or selfish or mean should not be used to describe the behavior of very young children. It is a sad fact of human nature that we are most likely to assign negative motives to our kids than positive ones. A 2-year-old who will not share a toy might be referred to as selfish, while a 2-year-old who shares may be called cute, not compassionate. Making sure we do not assign character traits to our young kids help them to learn our rules in a grace-filled atmosphere. I felt like it was best for me just to read that because, honestly, this is one of these concepts that I find really hard to explain to other moms, but I think it's so, so important. You will see when your children pass to the age of 3 that they can begin to understand. Their whole view of making choices becomes very different. They are able to know when they are disobeying you and consciously choosing to disobey you. That is very different from a 2-year-old who just can't keep their hand away from the snack drawer or can't keep their hand away from the outlet. You manage that behavior, but that's very different from the 3-year-old who absolutely knows they're not supposed to go get the cookie out of the cookie jar, and they choose to willfully disobey you. And I think that so often we as parents can make that mistake and attribute some of these character traits or motives to these young kids, and it really does them a disservice because it's so important that we are thinking in terms of how to create environments in our home that help our kids to be successful, irregardless of the different temperaments they have. So let me try to illustrate this one more time with a clear example. First of all, I do remember listening to a talk from James Dobson, who said that, if you had to spank your child more than 3 times over a certain issue, like a young child, then you probably were doing something wrong. So instead of using the word spanking, I never really spanked my little kids. We can talk about spanking in another podcast. But let's say a child was going for an outlet or something dangerous. I would definitely slap their hand to deter them. And I always use the word danger instead of the word no, because that's another helpful behavior management tool that a child at that age can learn to distinguish. No, I mean, we're saying no a lot to them for all sorts of behaviors, versus the word danger. I would use the word danger when they were doing something dangerous. So they knew that it was a different type of restriction. So in this example, let's say the kid is going for the outlet and I slap their hand and say danger. And then they do it again. I slap their hand again and say danger. And they do it again. I slap their hand again and say danger. Well, maybe some of my children didn't even ever need a hand slap. All I had to do was say danger and they would never go near it. Well, another one of my children might go repeatedly no matter how many times I did it. And it's so common that the one who keeps going might be called strong-willed or stubborn. But all we know is maybe they just have a very high pain tolerance and it's not deterred at all by a slap on the hand. So realizing that the best thing I can do for that child is not to keep slapping their hand and say, don't touch the outlet, but instead create such a safety zone that the outlet is not a danger to them. Because this child is obviously not ready to go to these internal gates, to these internal boundaries. What I want to do as a parent is help the child eventually get to the point where I can say danger or stop, and they're not going to touch that dangerous thing anymore. But you will find that young children will reach those things at different ages. And what we need to do as parents is focus on creating these successful environments for our kids so that at different temperaments, we are keeping them safe as we help them go from external rules to internal rules. Well, I know that was a lot to take in today, and really a greater breadth of discussion is in our book, Visionary Parenting. But I hope that's helpful for a lot of you with young kids to kind of focus on this setting up boundaries, creating environments where you can teach love and security, and helping your children go from these external boundaries and rules to internal boundaries and rules. And you will see as they progress to that, and we move into hopefully future discussions that we will have about what it means to then disciple and discipline our kids when they clearly can determine between right or wrong. So thank you today for joining me on Family Vision. We hope to see you next time.